Allen Lund Company, 47 years young and a proud sponsor, wishes OOIDA all the best as you celebrate 50 years.
OOIDA, representing America's truckers since 1973, presents Landline Now with your host, Mark Reddick.
The bad guys, as Brent Hutto of Truckstop likes to call them, have been active of late trying to steal money from hard-working truck drivers. The latest type of fraud on the rise? Fuel card theft. Brent explains what's behind the increase and how to stop those bad guys in their tracks. It can take a lot of work to get your own authority, and that includes insurance coverage. Today, we look at some tips for what you should look for when it comes to coverage and some questions to ask about your policy. And finally, we're in a summer freight cycle, which means fewer loads and lower spot rates. Landline Now's Ashley Blackford has the latest with DAT and today's market update, including some advice for owner-operators who are trying to negotiate a spot rate when fuel prices are so volatile. But first, the news with Scott Thompson.
Thanks, Mark. Our top story today: the International Brotherhood of Teamsters is applauding the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration for one of its latest moves. In a notice published in the Federal Register earlier this week, FMCSA said it would be considering waivers for the California and Washington meal and rest break rules that were issued in 2018 and 2020. The rules in those two states are stricter than federal regulations requiring commercial motor vehicle drivers to take more breaks, but those rules were preempted by FMCSA. In a news release, the Teamsters said the agency is right to reconsider and begin accepting applications for waiver petitions. Teamsters General President Sean O'Brien wrote that states should have the freedom to protect motorists and workers by implementing stronger meal and rest break requirements for professional drivers. Doing that prevents tragedies, O'Brien said, not just for commercial vehicle operators, but for all road users. As for petitions, FMCSA is now accepting them through November 13th. The agency has asked that respondents address three topics in particular: whether enforcement of a state's meal and rest break laws have impacted the health and safety of commercial motor vehicle drivers, whether enforcement of state meal and rest break laws has worsened the existing truck parking crisis, and whether enforcement of state meal and rest break laws dissuades motor carriers from operating in that state. The Women of Trucking Advisory Board held its second-to-last meeting this week. The focus of discussion, collaboration, and mentorship. Most of the board agreed that getting more women into the industry needs to start with younger women. Several members suggested increasing the number of events designed to engage younger crowds, like Touch a Truck events, to raise awareness of opportunities in the industry. The board also suggested that FMCSA help organize these events. Kelly Lynn McLaughlin, a driver for Clean Harbors and member of the Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association, believes the agency should be taking that a step further.
Maybe there's a way for FMCSA, Department of Transportation, to collaborate with them and other organizations like them that work with school counselors or student associations and vote tax centers to really raise awareness of these opportunities for women in the industry.
During the meeting, the board announced it would be going from 15 members to 6 for a final report committee. Those half-dozen members will prepare the board's final report for FMCSA. The board's next meeting will be its last. The Women of Trucking Advisory Board was formed to recruit and retain more women in the industry. Board statutes dictate the report be filed by November of this year. Nikola is now blaming a battery defect, not foul play, for a fire that burned 4 vehicles at its Arizona headquarters this summer. The company first believes someone set the fire, but Arizona Family News reports that independent investigators found a coolant leak in a battery pack, the same issue that caused a separate fire at a different plant. That finding is what caused Nikola to recall more than 200 of its semis earlier this week. The company has paused all sales as well until it can fix the problem. Nikola says its electric trucks not under the recall are safe to drive, but the main battery disconnect should be switched to on at all times, and trucks should be parked only outside. With fuel prices going up, spot rates are going down, according to DAT. Landline Now's Ashley Blackford has the details.
Weekly average spot rates fell last week. Stephen Pettit with DAT says brokers are generally able to charge a bit more to the shipper when fuel prices increase, but carriers, on the other hand, have a harder time negotiating higher rates. Pettit says spot rates decrease for all 3 equipment types.
National benchmark broker to carrier rate fell across the board last week. Van rate averaged $2.07 a mile. That's down 2 cents from the previous week. Reefer rate averaged $2.45 a mile, down 3 cents. The flatbed rate, $2.51 a mile. That's down 5 cents compared to the previous week. Load to truck ratios declined as well for vans and reefers. National average van load to truck ratio is 2.7, meaning there were 2.7 van loads on Members Edge for every available truck. That's down from 2.9 the previous week. Reefers, 4.3 loads per truck, down a little from 5 the previous week. Flatbeds, 6.8 loads per truck, up a little from 5.6 the previous week.
Pettit says load-to-truck ratios were also soft. Coming up later in our show, we'll hear more from Pettit in today's Market Update. For Landline Now, I'm Ashley Blackford.
Thanks, Ashley. A truck arrestor system in Wyoming is being credited with saving the day twice in recent weeks. The Wyoming DOT says 2 runaway vehicles on the Teton Pass were successfully brought to a stop using the system this month. The first incident happened on August 4th when the runaway truck ramp was utilized to stop an overweight semi. 4 nets slowed it down. The Wyoming DOT says the system was reset and ready for use by the following afternoon. Then that next Friday, the system was used again, this time by a pickup truck with an attached trailer. Officials say only the lead net was needed that time and it was replaced immediately. No injuries were reported in either instance. The Wyoming DOT says the system, sometimes referred to as a catch net system, works a lot like the way a jet plane is stopped on an aircraft carrier. 'Tis the season for the spotted lanternfly's return. The Connecticut DOT has issued an alert for the invasive pest. Signs are up at rest areas across the state reminding all drivers to check their vehicles. The Connecticut DOT says if anyone sees the infamous hitchhikers, as they put it, they should take matters into their own hands or feet and kill them. Eggs are a different story, though. September is the start of egg-laying season for the spotted lanternfly, which can cause severe damage to trees and crops. The egg mass stage looks like a smear of mud and can be found on any smooth, hard surface. To destroy that, you'll want to scrape the mass off of whatever surface it's on and into a container that has rubbing alcohol or hand sanitizer inside. Then double bag that container before disposing of it. A self-proclaimed Airbnb service for truck parking is expanding. TruckParkingClub.com says its free rest stop truck parking availability service is now available at 143 locations across 8 states. Most are in the Midwest or Upper Midwest. The TruckParkingClub.com app lets truckers see parking availability in real time and book a space at their desired location. Love's Travel Stops is making progress on plans to rebrand several E-Z-Go locations throughout the Midwest. The company says it's completed its overhaul of one store in Walters, Oklahoma. The E-Z-Go logos came down and the Love's logos went up. Next up, the remaining 11 E-Z-Go Turnpike stops in Oklahoma and Kansas. Work at those locations is set to be done by the end of this year. The Turnpike locations are the first ever for Love's. And finally, a truck driver recently got a quick lesson in the unforgiving nature of Death Valley in California. UPI reports that an off-duty National Park Service employee was recently driving behind a semi on eastbound California State Road 190 from Town Pass when the truck's brakes caught fire. The driver was able to put it out with a fire extinguisher after pulling over to the shoulder and continued on, but then it happened again. Fortunately, the National Park Service employee had already called ahead to rangers manning a fire engine about 35 miles away. They got there just in time to put out the flames, and the truck was able to leave the scene on 17 wheels. That's Landline Now News for today. I'm Scott Thompson.
Thanks, Scott. Next, Scott Thompson discusses fuel card theft with Brent Hutto of Truckstop. We'll hear about insurance and getting your own authority from Trina Skywalker and Trista Roby of OOIDA, and Ashley Blackford covers the summer freight market with Stephen Pettit of DAT. I'm Mark Reddick, and this is Landline Now.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe. If you want more content, go to landline.media to get updated news, information, and archived editions of our show. Once again, that's landline.media.
Forget misaccuracy, weigh your truck on a cat scale.
When you weigh on a cat scale, you get a no excuses guarantee. You can now save time weighing by using your smartphone. Find out more at weightmytruck.com.
Since you started, what you've loved about trucking is the freedom. Heading out on your favorite route, a good driving song, and thinking about truck insurance. Well, maybe not that last one, That's why we're here. At OOIDA, we have a full range of truck insurance products, expert advice, and great customer service, helping you get the right coverage for your operation. Go to OOIDA.com because your job is to drive. Our job is to help with everything else.
Landline Now, welcome back. If you've listened to the show in recent weeks or even recent months, you've heard us cover all the fraud schemes that are swirling around out there. A lot of it is happening with brokers, but not all of it. Joining us now to talk about a different kind of fraud that's been on the rise lately is Brent Hutto. Brent is the Chief Relationship Officer at Truckstop. Brent, how you doing?
Man, Scott, I'm doing fantastic. Thanks for having us back on, and I always appreciate your commentary out there to carriers in the marketplace. You know, they're near and dear to us, too, so thanks for all you're doing.
Absolutely. And it's always good to talk to you because we're talking about important things here, obviously protecting people out there from, getting scammed and schemed and all those other bad things that are going on out there. We're going to spend some time talking specifically today about fuel card fraud, though. Let's start. I think it's a good idea to start with the basics. You're obviously going to face, some risk anytime you make any sort of payment. But in terms of fuel cards, how are people getting tripped up out there?
Yeah, great question to start with. Well, we live in a digital world. You know, we don't use paper anymore to pay for things. You know, that thing called, money. And but we use everything's electronic. And you think about this industry for the owner-operators and the carriers that are out there, paying with plastic is the way to go. So the way initially that they get skipped, they get caught is like through cards being cloned, cards being skimmed. Cloned being someone duplicates the card off of maybe getting a picture of it. They get skimmed where somebody is actually catching the digital code off of it. And then just other people like, somebody might take an online fuel payment card and they may decide to use it for somebody else. In other words, they've got a company card, they're using it for somebody else that fits in a small carrier network. So those are kind of the three sort of dominant things that happen. But the issue is that it all comes back to, Scott, just the being very aware of you've got an environment that is right for people being able to steal information that can cost you money.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I've certainly talked with several drivers out there and heard even more stories from people who have had issues with this, who have had problems, who have gotten tripped up. I said earlier that this is an issue that seems to be on the rise. How big a problem is fuel card fraud right now? And I guess it kind of goes in line with all the other kinds of frauds that are going on out there right now, and on the rise as well, right?
Yeah, I tell you, starting back in October, where you started getting all kinds of freight fraud, where, you had, whether we on the carrier side, on the broker side, nobody's immune to this and it doesn't help anybody. That increased about 400%. Well, it'd be, you think about the amount of freight that moves, and then you think about the transactions via a electronic type payment, credit card or something. And it probably wouldn't surprise you to know that some of the indicators in the research that's come back, it says that the fraud that's gone on fuel cards has increased 700%.
Wow.
So, here's what's going on. When a marketplace gets desperate or it gets more hard to make money, the bad players come out. And people just don't pay attention as much, Scott, to what's going on. Look, I travel all over the place, and I'm always cautious about using my card. I have to pay for things all the time where I'm on a phone call or I'm putting it in on an airplane or something, and I'm always guarded about making sure no one can see what I'm doing. It applies the same thing at the pump. When you think about all these transactions, you think about fuel, it's a quarter of their cost every year. It's like $70,000, $80,000 of their cost of a truck driver's cost. So it's just so many opportunities for someone to come in and take advantage of an unsuspecting carrier.
Yeah, and it's kind of an easy target, to be frank as well, too. It's kind of
easy, yeah.
A volume type thing for these fraudsters, right? Because they can put these skimming devices on numerous pumps throughout the area, and, they get a couple hits and they're in for some money there. I want to talk about red flags and what you should be looking for out there as you're using fuel cards.
Yeah.
What are some things that people should be looking for to make sure they don't get scammed?
Yeah, great point, man. Well, as with everything else, whether you're a single owner-operator or you're an owner-operator that maybe has 4 or 5 other trucks that work with you, or whether you're a small fleet person. I know you guys actually, there's a lot of OIDA members that are small fleet owners. And the thing is you're right, to look at patterns. Remember, we live in a digital world, so look at patterns on things like things like unusual spending patterns or fuel increases. Like if the fuel purchase for the week is usually a certain amount, if it's way above that, here's a big thing, another thing, and I get my credit card company gives me all the time. If you have transactions that occur after normal business hours, now trucking's a little different, this is a 24/7 industry, or if it occurs in non-standard locations. I bought a piece of furniture in Texas. I live in Alabama. Immediately got an alert that there was a large purchase. So that purchase was in Texas. We live in Alabama, so they immediately flagged it. Of course, I had to say it was yes. Multiple another thing is multiple transactions in a short period of time. If someone has 3 fuel purchases a week and all of a sudden it moves to 6, that's they're going to need to look out for that. Another couple types are fuel types purchased not matching the company's vehicle specifications. So, different types of fuel, and obviously all trucks buy diesel, but what if they're buying at locations they don't normally buy at? So sort of things, because a lot of times companies can set up certain places that they can only buy fuel, and they try to buy out of those locations. Another way if you're looking at an individual carrier, or you're looking at someone like that, you may look at things like fuel costs that don't match the mileage. If it was tremendously higher than the actual the miles hauled, or tank capacity. These are all things that go into it. And then, and I said this before, kind of charges at odd locations. If you've got, trucks have to fuel up at places that only trucks can fit, right? I tell people this all the time. I'm like, hey, your average truck driver cannot access that diesel pump. But if it's at a place that's only really for consumers, then things like that point out. So those 7 things, Scott, are things to look for when you are trying to keep this fraud from happening on fuel cards.
Yeah, absolutely. We talked about skimmers earlier, and I think that's something
man, that's a big one.
That's huge, right? I mean, it's tripping up a lot of people out there, and it's so easy to get tripped up by this as well, too, right? Because you put your card in, you think everything's good, and then you find out later that, someone has stolen your information. We've talked about this on the show before, but it's always good to remind people out there about skimmers, that they are out there. And what to do when you are fueling up, because it is kind of a simple process to make sure that you're actually giving that money, giving that information to the fuel station as opposed to a fraudster out there. Can you remind people of what that process should look like?
Yeah, man, love to. I mean, this is this is for anybody that uses plastic. I'll tell you what. Remember, I got 5 kids, so a lot of plastic gets used in our house, and so. Credit card skimmer is something that it's a fraudulent. We're talking about fraud. It's a device that's attached to the payment system. So if they're really good at it, it looks just like it. And it's hard to perceive that it's actually skimming the information off the top of it. But what it's designed to do, it's attached to the device wherever it is, whether it's a swipe, whether it's a push. And by the way, the reason they put the little codes on the cards these days is because it makes it harder for skimmers to actually get into the device that way. But so the skimming machine often looks just like a typical card reader, all right? But they're not like that. And so what they do is you put it in, and you think you're running a standard transaction, and it's actually getting all of your electronic information off the card. You pull it back out, you're unsuspected, unaware. So it actually takes all the information off. There's also another thing on skimmers where they attach. Sometimes these criminals are pretty smart. They'll attach a small camera where they can see your card as it goes in, so they don't have to actually mess with the device itself, because this is called skimming too, where basically they're getting your information and they can see your card. They get the information off your card. They watch you put the code in if it's a debit type card, or it takes a PIN transaction. A lot of credit cards take PIN transactions now, and they just pull the information off it. That's what a credit card skimmer is designed to do. It's designed to pull your electronic signature off that card and the numbers on that card and your code in that card, so someone can just go haywire with it.
That's crazy. I mean, you always think that the criminals are, one step ahead and always try new things. I mean, the cameras, it makes sense if you think about it, but it's just wild to me that these, criminals are doing anything and everything they can to get information and get money from hardworking folks out there. You talked about some of the red flags, which are important, obviously, but let's talk real quickly here about prevention as well, because there are some things that you can do, I believe, right, to make sure that you aren't getting scammed here. Things like requiring a PIN for each driver, limiting fuel times, and things like that. Can you talk a bit about those prevention measures?
Yeah, sure. A couple things that we found that's real effective. We deal with thousands and thousands and thousands of owner-operators and small fleet companies as well, have since 95, so we've been around a long time. And this is always an issue. When you think about the number of cards that a carrier can handle. Sometimes they have personal card, they have a business card. Sometimes they have multiples of those things, depending on spending limits. And so, the number one thing you want to do is educate yourself. Educate yourself, educate your team. Like I said, if you're an owner-operator that has, a lot of owner-operators do. They have 2 or 3 or 4 other guys working together as a team. And so it's just educate yourself. Make sure you understand scammers, the skimmers, phishing frauds. In other words, somebody tried to get to you on email. If somebody's the scams and theft is, they're like, oh, get a huge. If somebody's offering you a giant discount on something off the normal rack rate or the normal rate that you pay, beware of that. Just make sure that you're looking. And so education is, and I know we say this over and over about fraud. Usually it's just the same thing. You got an eye, you got eyes, you got a brain. Pay very close attention and educate those that are within your system to your payment system, so they know how to operate the system and typical just the blocking and tackling of, hey, make sure you guard your number, make sure no one's standing right close to you when you're actually entering things in. Another thing would be require a PIN, for an individual PIN for every single card. Now, if cards don't all, if you have 6 cards in your system, they all require the same PIN. It's all a different PIN. So for each person using it, we can't emphasize that enough. And sometimes you even have even more of a standard. So if there's another way to have a dual check-in on those things, then absolutely a PIN. Make sure that it won't accept it unless if it's a chipped card, it has to be inserted. Those things, and sometimes even the touch cards. You want to make sure that I know sometimes people can bypass the security on something by using a touch card just at the pump, so it just automatically authorizes it. Make sure that requires a PIN too. Set spending limits. This is a big one. All right. So if you know that your average cards you're going to use, if you're just a single owner operator, if you know you're never going to spend more than, say, $1,000 a week or $2,000 or $5,000 a week, make sure you have a spending limit on it so you're not out more than can be put on the card, so it can automatically shut down. Also, here's another thing, and I talked about this earlier when we were talking about things to look for, was the fueling times. If you run certain routes during the day and someone's never going to be fueling at 3 a.m. in the morning, 4 a.m. in the morning or something like that, then make sure the card is not active at that time. So you can set all kinds of unique things that are on there into the system. And I even talked about this too. Some of the ways you can prevent this, like I said, don't swipe unless you have to. If you can just touch, and that way the card can't be seen by a camera or skimmed off of something, you usually can. That's why those systems are set up. That's often good for you. And like I said, just use your head. I mean, that's what I have to do it. We all have to do it. So to me, there's nobody better than truck drivers. These guys are the absolute salt of the earth. They know what they're doing with their systems. But sometimes when you're in a hurry, that's where a fraudulent person or a criminal, the bad guys, as I like to call them, can really take advantage of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and you hit on something that I was going to say is that, common sense does go a long way with this. But as you mentioned, folks out there, they're working hard. They may be tired. They may not be, using all of their senses while they're fueling up, thinking I can, kind of relax for a moment. But really, you do have to stay vigilant because those bad guys, as you put them, are out there and they're trying to get your money. So a lot of common sense stuff here. We appreciate it, Brent. I do want to ask you real quick, if anybody out there wants more information, courtesy of Truckstop on this or any of the other services that you have going on, where should they go? Oh, man, same place they could come since July 25th of 1995, I love to say the old school way, www.truckstop.com. We're here to make sure carriers run a profitable, safe business that's free of fraud, and so that's why we're so vigilant about it. And we appreciate everything that Landline does and OIDA does to protect carriers as well, and that's why we are happy to help out anytime. The World Wide Web, www.truckstop.com.
Always good.
Hey, Brent, thanks so much. We appreciate it, and I'm sure we'll talk to you soon.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much.
Our thanks to Brent Hutto of Truckstop. Landline Now is back in just a moment.
You trust PrePass for more bypasses? Now let PrePass help with tolls. PrePass toll service means lower cost, one invoice for all tolls, and fewer violations. Created by truckers for truckers. Call 877-878-5970 or go to prepass.com.
Attention all truckers, Dean Michael, the tax doctor here. I want to talk to you about those dreaded tax problems. I know you want to keep on trucking and not even think about them, but let's face it, they're not going away all on their own. You need professional help. I've been helping truckers put their tax problems in the rearview mirror for years. I can help you too. Call me now for a free consultation at 888-557-4020 or go to mytaxhelpmd.com. It's like I always say, keep your eyes on the road, I'll keep mine on the IRS. 888-557-4020.
Landline now. Welcome back. Like tires, fuel, and an engine, insurance is one of those things you just have to have for your truck. But not all insurance is created equal. Ashley Blackford is here with the experts from OOIDA's Truck Insurance Department to answer some questions.
Thanks, Mark, and hello to Trina Skywalker and Trista Roby with OOIDA's Insurance Department. How are you doing today, ladies?
Smashing.
Doing great. Wonderful. Today we are talking about shopping for insurance after you've gotten your new authority. We've discussed before what you should look for in the process of shopping for insurance, but let's focus on some specifics when it comes to getting your own authority and insurance for that type of operation. My first question is, can it be difficult to get insurance if you've just gotten your own authority?
The short of that is yes, it can be difficult, regardless of how many years experience you have driving and in the industry. A lot of insurance companies are looking for how many years experience you've had with that authority in a business that's already built up.
We've actually gone to a seminar where it was a lot of various insurance agents. And it was, one of those seminars, continuing education. And so there was a lot of information discussed. But one of the things that we found out is there's a lot of companies that won't even write coverage if you have new authority, which was kind of surprising to us because, like Trista said, your driving experience is a big part of all of that. And you have driving experience whether you're leased on or have your own authority.
And especially if it's good experience and a good history.
Right. Yeah, it was just surprising to see that so many companies just flat out wouldn't do it. I don't think either one of us realized that prior to.
That was definitely a big takeaway from that meeting.
What questions can someone expect to be asked if they've gotten their own authority and they're calling to get coverage?
Well, it's going to vary, surprise, depending on the company you're calling. They're all different. Some of the biggest stuff that you're going to get with any insurance company, I think, is going to be experience, employment history.
Equipment information.
What are you hauling?
Yeah. The thing is, and I mean, this is actually going to get drawn out now, so thanks for asking. But really, again, depending on who you're calling and depending on whether or not they're doing their underwriting up front or afterwards, sometimes with some of the smaller agencies and that sort of thing, there's just a few small questions they'll submit. They may get more questions back, or they may go ahead and get a rate, and then the insurance company, once it's bound, will come back with additional questions. And then, you've got your insurance companies that want to get all the information up front and give you more of a firm rate up front.
Yeah, we have had customer complaints because of the length of time, it takes to go through the quote process and obtain that information. And we just try to tell them, if you're getting a rate really quick, then there's a good chance that rate's going to change. There is a chance that the rate could change with any insurance company. There's an underwriting period specific to each state, that the company has kind of a window of time to say, oh, we just found out about this huge incident, we're going to have to cancel the policy. A lot of times it's just a rate change, but it's kind of a red flag when it's a really quick quote because they just haven't delved into enough information
in the background. And also, the thing that you have to think of is that insurance company is putting $1 million on the line 100% of the time. It's not like some of the secondary coverages that we've talked about, like bobtail, where they're only on the hook 5% or less of the time with primary liability, which is the coverage that you need for your own authority. And that's what activates your MC number. With that coverage, the insurance company is on the hook for $1 million 100% of the time. And quite honestly, if they're not underwriting that $1 million, Trina's right, red flag.
Right. Well, I mean, we kind of compare it to a gamble or a bet. More of a gamble than a bet. But I mean, for the underwriters, it is a gamble. You know, they do have to assess the risk and see what kind of risk factors there are. You know, if they see that there's a few speeding tickets, you know, it's not always just about accidents and claims and things of that nature. Even if they see that, you know, you're ticketed frequently or stuff like that, it's all part of them deciding whether or not they want to take the bet.
And it's all part of your history, really.
Right.
Why is it so important to be upfront about everything?
Well, the big thing about that is then the underwriters have all the information they need to give you a more precise rate. A lot of times with certain companies, and I mean, I can really speak for us, but when we insure, you know, when we get all that information up front, we're depending on what's being told to us. So then when we actually go back and say we verify work history or receive loss runs, and there's information there that we didn't know about, and again, maybe speaking for other companies too, but there's information there that we don't know about, then that's when you're going to see rates increase.
And a lot of times, folks don't think that certain things count. So we'll find ourselves in a position where the underwriters find out about some sort of a claim or accident that happened, you know, and this is after we've taken the down payment, started the policy, given what we believe is a firm rate. Then we find out about something else. And a lot of times they're like, oh, it was private property, or I didn't turn it into the insurance company. I paid out of pocket, which is understandable. I understand, you know, those situations, but it still is another accident that they didn't know about. It increases the risk. Anything that they find out after the fact increases the risk in their eyes. So whether it's a moving violation or a fender bender, even if it's one that's not at fault.
Or not reportable.
Right. It's still going to increase the risk.
Do you find people kind of hope like, well, they'll probably not find out about that, so I don't really want to mention it? You will find out.
Yes.
That's actually a pretty common one. And I think especially whenever they're giving work history, because typically you don't run into companies that are going to still do all of the legwork of calling those companies. But some insurance companies do still. And I remember actually Trina had a funny story about that.
Yeah, where I had to call a customer and say, you know, hey, the rate's increasing. We verified your employment, and there was whatever it was. It's been years ago. Something was found out, some accident. And, you know, a lot of people are kind of frustrated by it. And he was like, man, no insurance company's ever found out about that before. So, like, he was just shocked that we did. So it was a little comical just because you're used to hearing frustration in those calls. But he was just like, wow. Shoot.
And I mean, I think a lot of times that is the hope, is the insurance company won't find out about it. But I do think there are plenty of instances where people have just forgotten because it is so minor. It wasn't turned in. It wasn't reportable. It did happen on private property.
Or a personal vehicle. We have a lot of folks who don't think that something in a personal vehicle counts
but
towards commercial insurance. Yeah, I mean, it all is a testament to how you drive, regardless of what kind of vehicle you're in.
Now, if you call for coverage and your policy is canceled, can you be out money?
Well, if you cancel your insurance shortly after getting your authority, and it does happen.
Some companies short rate versus prorate. So, you know, there are percentages that you have to keep your policy for so many days, or a certain percentage is kept out. You know, what you'd really want to look for in those cases would be a prorated company, because they're only rating you for the days that you use.
Yeah, and we've heard stories in the past. I can't say it's happening now, but some insurance companies were kind of shysters.
Yeah.
And they would write a risk knowing that it probably wouldn't make it through the underwriters, maybe it was brand new authority. And, they would know that that's not acceptable, but they would go ahead and push it through, take the down payment, and it would be more of a short rate company like Trista was talking about. And so they'd put 20% down and lose it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, get none of their deposit back or, none of their even premiums, however, and knowing that that's going to be canceled from the get-go, knowing that it didn't meet the underwriting guidelines from the very get-go.
So what should someone ask to, make sure that if something does happen in the underwriting process that, do they get that deposit back or?
I think that's really, one of the biggest things is what you just said. Is this deposit refundable? Am I going to get this back? Is this a prorated policy or a short-rated policy? And I mean, you don't have to be that technical with your terms, but basically, if you guys decide to cancel me tomorrow because your underwriters don't like something that they see on this application, is that deposit refundable?
Well, and you might just ask them kind of generically, too, like, what's your cancellation process? And you want to know, obviously there's different things you're looking for. The deposit's a huge one. But you also want to know, like, do they have to give some sort of a notice? Because we run into that a lot. When someone calls to cancel their coverage with us, there's filings that we have to file with FMCSA, and we're obligated to stay on those for 35 days after cancellation's requested, or whether or not it's requested. Even if we choose to cancel the policy, we have to give a 35-day notice. And some insurance companies will cancel it same day, like air quotes, in-house, same day. But a lot of companies won't because they're still on the hook. If we cancel it in-house same day and then you have an accident 10 days later, our filing is still out there on FMCSA and we're still liable for the claim. So that's kind of a big deal too, because a lot of folks don't realize that the insurance company is obligated to that kind of notice.
So in some cases, that deposit is being used for those 35 additional days of coverage. You might have a smaller refund coming back than you think because a portion of that was used for the 35 days of additional coverage.
And there are some agents that might try to amend that cancellation after the 35 days. I can't say a lot of them do because it's extra premium they get to keep. But sometimes if you change your operation, lease to a motor carrier, it's worth asking them, if there's a chance that it could be amended, because some of them do.
Surprise, ask the questions.
Yeah.
The questions. And I think you've mentioned if you go to another insurance company, will they sometimes take over that 35 days?
They can. There's a thing called a hold harmless, and most companies accept those. And so basically when the new company takes over those filings, they'll write a hold harmless to your old insurance company saying, even though you're still on those filings for 35 days, we're holding you harmless during this time. So that's a pretty standard thing within our industry.
Yeah, that's about the only time the filing's going to get replaced, though, is if they just move insurance companies. If they change their operation, it's just going to have to write out the time.
Yeah.
So if someone has gone through all of the trouble to get their own authority, what words of wisdom do you have for them when it comes to getting insurance coverage?
I would say biggest thing, ask the questions, be upfront, be totally transparent with your insurance company. Because you don't want a surprise down the line when you're already on the road or into your operation, finding out that you didn't meet their guidelines because maybe you weren't as upfront with them as you should have been.
Yeah, and especially if you've already done the work to figure out what your operating costs are. I mean, sometimes these rates jump by a lot, and it really changes everything about your operating cost.
All right. Wonderful. Well, ladies, thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Our thanks to Trina Skywalker and Trista Roby of OOIDA's Truck Insurance Department. If you have any questions about insurance, you can call 816-229-5791. For Landline Now, I'm Ashley Blackford. We'll be back after this.
Firestone tires are for more of everything. More miles for every tire dollar, and more confidence in your fleet. At Firestone, we help fleets save with dependable value. Find your local Firestone dealer today at firestonetire.com/dealer.
Ready to make more money? use a better load board. For a limited time, get 50% off Truckstop Load Board Pro. Just go to truckstop.com/go and enter promo code READY2023 when you purchase Load Board Pro.
It's tested and proven. Burn 2.1% less fuel when you balance all wheel ends with Centromatic. Call 800-523-8473 to get the OOIDA discount.
Landline Now. Welcome back. There are a number of critical questions you need to answer in order to run a successful trucking business. Among the most important of those questions are, where's the freight going to be and how much is it going to pay? Today, Landline Now senior correspondent Ashley Blackford will bring us answers to both of those important questions with a look at this week's freight markets with the folks from DAT. Here's Ashley now with the report.
Thanks, Mark, and hello to Stephen Pettit with DAT. How are you doing today, Stephen?
I'm great, Ashley. How are you?
I'm good. Now, looking at DAT's benchmark spot rates and load-to-truck ratios, it sure seems like we're in a summer freight cycle. There were fewer loads on the DAT load board and lower spot rates last week. What is going on?
Yeah, definitely in a summer freight cycle. Fewer loads and lower rates on the network during the week of August 6th through 12th. And there were fewer trucks. Number of truck posts on Members Edge has declined for each of the last 4 weeks. It's now down 11% compared to this time last year. I think, lots of reasons why fewer truckers are posting their trucks. I think number one, there's just less freight to chase. Number of loads posted to Members Edge dropped by 13.5% last week to 1.24 million loads. Demand for trucks, it's typically flat in the middle of August, but Ashley, the total number of loads posted on the network is down 48% compared to the same week last year. Number of available van loads fell 11% last week. Number of reefer and flatbed loads both down 16% week over week. Load posts are well below where they were last year at this time. Dry van load posts are down 37%, reefer loads down 48%. Number of flatbed loads are down 68% year over year. It's definitely a summer freight cycle. Fuel prices, I think, are another factor. Prices have increased, for each of the last 4 weeks. Those higher operating costs are, I think, really testing the wherewithal of carriers on the spot market right now. Spot rates, as a reminder, they're negotiated as all-in rates, meaning no separate fuel surcharge to help mitigate the risk of fuel price fluctuations. And I'd like to think that some truckers are maybe taking some time away from some really challenging summer operating conditions. We'll see where everyone is in a few weeks when fall and holiday goods start moving through supply chains.
Now, I'm looking at weekly average spot rates, and they fell last week. Why do spot rates seem to go down when the price of fuel goes up?
Yeah, it's a really interesting dynamic. The simple answer is that brokers have no trouble telling shippers that, hey, fuel is up 57 cents a gallon over the last month. It's going to cost you more to find a truck. And shippers respond because they need to move that load. Small carriers, on the other hand, are at a disadvantage because they don't know what the price of diesel is going to be every time they have to go fill up, right? And they're competing against other carriers that, for whatever reason, might be willing to take a lower rate. And as I mentioned, unlike a long-term freight contract, there is no separate fuel surcharge on a broker-to-carrier spot rate. You have to negotiate each individual load with fuel costs and operating costs in mind, which can be really hard to do. The end result is that when fuel prices go up, brokers can expand their margins. They can charge shippers more while betting that carriers will take a little less to keep the truck running.
And it looks like that's what happened last week. Spot rates decreased for all three equipment types.
Yeah, that's right. National benchmark broker-to-carrier rate fell across the board last week. Van rate averaged 207 a mile. That's down 2 cents from the previous week. Reefer rate averaged 245 a mile, down 3 cents. The flatbed rate, 251 a mile. That's down 5 cents compared to the previous week. Load-to-truck ratios declined as well for vans and reefers. National average van load-to-truck ratio is 2.7, meaning there were 2.7 van loads on Members Edge for every available truck. That's down from 2.9 the previous week. Reefers, 4.3 loads per truck, down a little from 5 the previous week. Flatbeds, 6.8 loads per truck, up a little from 5.6 the previous week. Load-to-truck ratios, they can indicate supply and demand on the spot market, and it's helpful to look at them in the longer term. Over the last 12 weeks, so 3 months, the van ratio has averaged 2.7 loads per truck, which is exactly where we are today. Even in markets where van capacity has been tight, like LA, Dallas, Memphis, Atlanta, Columbus, Ohio, Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, ratios are sitting in the 2s and 3s, not far off the national average, and it's reflected in those benchmark outbound rates. Those rates, by the way, they're based on invoice data for loads moved. They're benchmarks that are just designed to guide you. The actual rate that you negotiate is going to depend on the lane, load, and other conditions, and the rate that you accept is always going to be up to you.
What advice would you give to owner-operators out there who are trying to negotiate a spot rate while fuel prices are so volatile? How do they protect themselves?
Oh, man. There are many strategies that owner-operators can use to keep costs in check and to maximize loaded miles. There are some ways that you can use the load board to do that. There's a saying among mountain climbers, right? I do a lot of mountain climbing, that getting to the summit is optional and getting back down is mandatory. So the same thing with truckers. Don't take a load into a market without knowing whether you can afford to get back out. So ideally, you want to go from one high demand market to another. And if you can't, you can use a higher paying lane to make up for a low paying lane coming back. So LA to Phoenix always pays better than Phoenix to LA. Phoenix doesn't generate a lot of outbound freight. Philadelphia to Boston is always going to pay better than Boston to Philly. Boston doesn't generate any freight, period. Another thing that you can do is break up low-paying lanes. DAT load boards have a tri-haul routing feature that'll suggest different options for segmenting a low-revenue lane into 2 better-paying lanes. So instead of Dallas to Chicago, let's say, you might add a leg and go Dallas to Toledo and then Toledo to Chicago. This tri-haul feature will automatically calculate the total rate and distance, and then you can decide whether adding a leg to your trip is going to work with your schedule, your hours of service, and your wallet for that matter. Another trick or another tip really is to calculate your own fuel surcharge. Fuel surcharges are designed to protect the carrier against changes in the price of fuel over the life of a contract. Because spot freight is negotiated on a per transaction basis and you're going to go pick up the load in the near future, there is no separate surcharge. It just doesn't make sense. So you should account for the price of fuel when you negotiate your rate. Based on last week's national average retail price of $4.38 a gallon, the average fuel surcharge would be 52 cents a mile for van freight, 57 cents a mile for reefers, and 63 cents for a flatbed load. There are a ton of fuel surcharge calculators out there. I know OOIDA can help with that. And literally, your mileage will vary when it comes to calculating a fuel surcharge. You want to dial one in for your specific operation. But if you subtract an average fuel surcharge from a spot rate, you're left with an underlying base rate or a line haul rate. And last week, the line haul rates were $1.55 a mile for vans, $1.85 a mile for reefers, and $1.91 a mile for flatbeds. Line haul rates were improving when fuel prices were falling, and lately, not so much. So the general rules of trucking in volatile times apply. Know your operating costs, reduce deadhead miles, make sure you're heading into a market where you're more likely to find a decent paying load out, and build your fuel expense into the rate for each load you haul.
We have a little bit of time remaining. How about a market to watch this week?
Yeah, Philadelphia reefers. Let's try that. Heading into the fall, domestic fruit and vegetable production will give way to imports from South America and Central America at ports with big temperature control facilities like Philadelphia. And Philadelphia is huge. It has 25 million cubic feet of temperature controlled storage. About 55% of all containers coming into Philadelphia are temperature controlled. That's a remarkable number compared to other ports. Outbound rates usually build out of Philadelphia in August to a bit of a peak around Labor Day, and then they dip in September. Illinois, North Carolina, and Ohio are the top 3 destinations for reefer loads out of Philadelphia. Right now, reefer load to truck ratio in Philadelphia is above 7. That's well above the national average. Our market conditions index shows tight capacity this week with high activity on the usual lanes: Chicago, Charlotte, Lakeland, Atlanta, Boston, Miami. Not only is the Port of Philadelphia significant for reefer carriers, the Packer Avenue Marine Terminal is a major gateway for steel and project cargo shippers, which makes it a great market for flatbed carriers as well.
All right. Wonderful. Stephen, thank you so much.
Yeah, anytime, Ashley. You can always get the latest rate information at dat.com/trendlines or look for Dean Croak's market updates at dat.com. Stay safe on the road, and thanks for your hard work.
All right. That was Stephen Pettit with DAT. I'm Ashley Blackford with Landline Now. That's our show for today. Thank you for tuning in, and be sure to join us again tomorrow.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe. If you want more content, go to landline.media to get updated news, information, and archived editions of our show. Once again, that's landline.media.
I'm a dad,
a son,
a husband,
wife,
I'm a writer,
photographer.
I farm.
I'm a veteran.
I love old cars, fishing,
my kids,
chrome, and I am
a professional truck driver.
And together we are OOIDA.
OOIDA was founded by truckers to stand up and speak on behalf of truckers. We've done that by combining the individual voices of our members into a single, powerful voice. Protecting your interests, defending your rights.
Join us!
Make your voice heard. Join OOIDA, the Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association. Call 1-800-444-5791 or visit ooida.com.